With a growing appreciation of the wisdom of applying the road tax monies to the road building program for which they were designed, highway development is going on at a rapidly increasing pace.
There was a World's Fair in 1939 where industry decided to sort of like change the course of development in its totality in the United States and all around the world. And they basically portrayed a vision of a future urban existence where automated cars would drive around and people would just sit in them and enjoy life, and the car was sort of like sold as the solution to a happy life for everybody.
Come, let's travel into the future. What will we see? And now we have arrived in this wonder world of 1960. The World's Fair exhibit, modeled with such artistry and skill that we must continually remind ourselves the world we are now seeing is a vision, an artistic conception which may undergo many changes as it develops into the great realities of tomorrow.
The freeways cannot be built fast enough to keep up with the growing crowds of cars, buses, and trucks. Los Angeles has more cars than any city in the world.
The more people bought into it and the more they actually got cars, the more they were then ending up in the streets, and eventually people ran out of street parking spaces, so they said, hey, we gotta have a parking space too, we live in that area, let's make sure they pressured the politicians to develop parking requirements that were on site, where every car that somebody might own needs to be accommodated on the site of a new development. We have extrapolated that into an insane ratio, and we are building more space today for cars than we are building for people to live in. Well, rezoning can help in a couple of ways. Zoning can focus on the transit nodes around the transit station. You would pack people in who, in all likelihood, would probably use that transit system to get around, much more so than if they were living away from a transit system. LA was originally conceived and built, started out as a city of villages around streetcar nodes. And so around the streetcar stops, there usually was a very nice little walkable village developed. And in the process of doing so, several building types were used that are still very beloved today. For instance, there's the duplexes, the triplexes, the quadplexes. And these buildings were initially built without or with very little parking. And today, they are much beloved buildings that, we sort of look up to. Now, there are other building types as well that Los Angeles really never had. Most notable of that is the row house. The row house is sort of like the workhorse of the transit-oriented walkable city. A row house is basically an urban house that has all the qualities of a freestanding house, but it packs many more people into the same area as suburbia. If we had row houses, we would generate sort of like the entrance level of density to make transit feasible. If you have that many people living on a block, let's say you have a normal block that has 25 houses on, with row houses you could at least double that, and everybody would still have their yard and everybody would have a same size house, and it can all be very pretty. And if you had that many people there, it would make it feasible for a bus to pick them up, and a bus could then take them to another transit line, to a train, etc., etc. So the last building type that we also don't have here, but that would help us a lot, is called the perimeter block. And that basically assumes that you build buildings on the outside of a big block, perimeter, and look into the interior of the block, which is left open and green. We don't have barely anything like that in the US. The habit, if you go to another country, is that you sleep with your windows open into your interior court, and you have a living room that looks out into the street. The interior court is quiet and sort of like semi-private. The street is busy and noisy, and you close the windows and you interact with it if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to. And an arrangement like that, if it's between 5 and 7 story high, packs in enough density to make transit completely feasible and functional. And if we did this in Los Angeles around our transit nodes, if we built that type of city, maximum 7 stories high, in a half-mile circle around each transit node, and if we built row houses in a ring another half-mile around that inner circle, we could pack in more people in only 1.65% of LA County than live in the entire LA County currently. So we would create a ton of capacity for new people to arrive, for existing people to have a different life, and none of them, if they lived in those areas, would ever need to take a car because they have the availability of train transit. And because of parking requirements, many of these buildings can no longer be constructed at all because it wouldn't pay off to dedicate half or more of the site, to a parking lot and only have a tiny little postage stamp left to build on. Getting around cannot be only accomplished by having cars. Getting around needs to be done by a variety of other means that are more space efficient than the automobile. These building types will generate the conditions for the cities to actually work.